Okay, this is the first actual lecture for 636. Again, if you have any questions related to the content of the course at any point, please feel free to contact me. Excuse me. There's a maximum of 15 minutes per video, so it's possible that there will be a couple of parts to this. So feel free to take a look at anything that you need to look at and contact me again if there are questions. Okay, so what are we going to talk about in this lecture? Develop some understanding of organizations, what they are, briefly look at the components, and discuss a major element of organizational understanding, what we call auspice. And then we also have our first online assignment, and that'll be discussed at the end of this video. So, what are organizations? Organizations are most basically defined as a group of people intentionally organized to accomplish an overall common goal or set of goals. In other words, they're a collection of people who work together to achieve a purpose that all members share. It could be any kind of purpose. Everything from building a bridge to providing services to health care. Lots of options. Next slide. So before you read the next few slides, ask yourself, why organizations? What do they do for us? And think about that, because we're going to return to that again and again and again during the semester. Next slide. So one answer about why organizations is to think about the value of groups. Looking at groups. Groups are a larger term of which organizations are a subset. A group is the largest set of two or more individuals who are jointly characterized by a network of relevant communications, a shared sense of collective identity, and one or more shared goal dispositions with associative normative strengths. So what does that mean? Basically, a group of people get together, have a common purpose, they communicate with one another, and they do things. That's what organizations do. But organizations have some special characteristics, which we'll be talking about. Next slide. So what do groups and organizations do for us? Lots of things. They accomplish tasks, they connect us, they provide emotional support, they validate us, and they help us meet our needs. Again, all of us in our daily life participate in many groups and organizations so that we can achieve these things, these critical functions in our life. Next slide. But most importantly, to understand an organization, you need to understand a very simple idea. It's easier to accomplish almost any task with the resources of numbers. How about building a bridge? Could you do that by yourself? Probably not. I know I couldn't. I'd have a difficult time getting across the Delaware River by swimming or a canoe or any other method. It's a lot easier if you have a group of people that come together and build a bridge. Or how about eliminating hunger? Even in your own family, without some kind of organizational intermediary. Next slide. And from a social work perspective, organizations are the mediating system between a person and the fulfillment of a need. The organizations that we work with help us to achieve a variety of needs that our clients might have difficulty achieving. So if you work in a mental health facility, where would a person get those services if there wasn't some sort of organizational context that would provide it? Next slide. So there are many types of organizations. One of the first way that we define the difference in types of organizations is between a formal organization or an informal organization. A formal organization means it has some sort of legal classification. We call that legitimated. Banks, churches, homeless shelters are pretty good examples of those. Informal organizations are people that come together for no legal reason, but often serve as important social entities for us, such as a group of people that meet after work, a few friends that get together on a regular basis and hand sandwiches out to hungry persons. Or, in the worst case, something like a neighborhood loan shark. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about the components of groups and organizations. And really there are these four elements in front of you that are critical in understanding any organization. There's what we call the organization or legal component, which speaks to a variety of aspects such as auspice, mission goals, rules and policies, bylaws, strategic plans, and we'll be talking about all those today and in the next sets of lectures. Structure. So, who works for who reports to who does what within an organization. Processes, information and authority have to go through the organization to allow things to get done. And then the environment that the organization deals with. So the first week, in essence, these first couple of lectures you're going to get deal with these, but the initial ones we're going to deal with are the information and legal. Next slide. Excuse me. So, information or legal components include the auspice, which is the legal basis. We'll go into that in some detail in a moment. Vision, what the organizational worldview is, what kind of world the organization seeks to be a part of. The mission, so what is the mission of the organization? Why does it exist? Goals, these are the specific outcomes that the organization seeks to achieve. And then rules and policies. Bylaws and constitutions are examples of rules and policies, but it's much more complex than that. We'll be returning to all those as well. Next slide. So let's deal with the issue of auspice first. Auspice is a term that's used for classifying the legal or support basis of an organization. And essentially there are three big types of auspice. There are governmental organizations. There are organizations that exist to make money or for profit. And there are organizations that serve some other public good, which we typically call nonprofit or not-for-profit organizations. Essentially the same. There's some minor funding differences, but they're essentially the same. Next slide. So governmental auspice, what does that mean? It's an organization that's created from a legislative or executive action, generally such as the federal constitution or some public law, state constitution, or local charters. Next slide. Examples. At the federal level, we have cabinets and departments. There are a number of agencies, such as the Federal Reserve or the Environmental Protection Agency. And then there are a large number of what we call quasi-governmental agencies, which are agencies that are set up by the federal government or state governments, but then do their own thing. You can see a whole list of these different kinds of organizations at the website below, and you'll be amazed at just exactly how many different kinds of organizations there are that come out of government action. Next slide. Here's an example of some cabinet positions. You hear things talk about cabinet in terms of the president all the time. And even here, look at the large number there. There's the state, the Treasury, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, the Interior Department, Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing, and on and on and on. Each of these has a certain level of clout and a certain level of authority, but all were created by some sort of federal action to deal with various aspects of quality of life in our society. Next slide. Now, what we're spending a lot of time with are what we would call private sector organizations. And there are two big types, nonprofit organizations and for-profit. Again, both types are private sector. They're not governmental organizations. But often to become a nonprofit, an organization must receive some sort of governmental approval. So in other words, to achieve the auspice of a nonprofit organization, you must seek the approval of government in some way. For-profits, on the other hand, may seek governmental approval, and doing so has some important benefits, but it's not 100% necessary. So I sell records on eBay in my spare time sometimes. I don't have any legal auspice. I just do it. I have to pay my taxes and things like that. So to some degree, that's the auspice, if you will, or the basis of the auspice. But there are other types that can be very important. Now, what's important here is that both the nonprofit and for-profit actually can make profit, meaning they can have surplus funds after they spend all of their funds for the year. But there are important differences with ownership and what can be done with those surplus funds, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So organizations and their goals are the basis of this difference for the most part. Most philanthropic and educational agencies have traditionally been nonprofit, but that's changing. Next slide. So here's how we commonly think of the difference between for-profit and nonprofit organizations. The goals of the for-profit: high returns, money, profit. The nonprofit deals with community, health, welfare, the greater good. Next slide. For-profit organizations are generally there to make or maximize profit, income, or value. There are many different types, but one commonality of a for-profit organization is they all have an identifiable owner, including other organizations. One organization can own another. Organizations have the same rights as a person under the law, and persons who work in some types of organizations are shielded from identification and liability. Some of you may have heard about the controversy with the Citizens United Supreme Court case recently. So there's three main types of for-profit organizations: sole proprietorships, which means one person owns it; a partnership, which means there are a group of people that own it in common; and then corporations, which have the right to buy and sell stock. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about these things at all, but they're important to understand that difference when we look at nonprofit and how they operate. So what is a nonprofit? A nonprofit exists for many different purposes, but it has a tax and regulatory definition, and it enjoys special tax status. Primarily, they don't have to pay taxes on their activity. It faces what's called a non-distribution constraint. It can make profit, but it cannot be distributed. And it has no formal owners. The money that is made and the value of that organization is held in trust for the public good. So the functional definition is that an organization exists to perform public tasks, things like environmental protection or social services. Most of us work in nonprofit organizations. And it may also be that they exist where there are tasks for which there is a demand, but no for-profit organization or government should or can have a role in it, such as many religious institutions. And very often in the news these days are organizations that exist to affect and direct public policy. Next slide. So they're not conducted or maintained for the purposes of making a profit. They are not commercially motivated, although money is always important. And it's one that's committed legally not to distribute any net earnings or profits to any member. They can pay for services rendered, they can pay for goods, they can sell goods, but that profit cannot be distributed over and above that payment for services. Next slide. A nonprofit organization is formed for the purpose of serving the public for mutual benefit other than the pursuit of accumulation of profit for the owners or investors. What we call the nonprofit sector is a collection of entities that are organizations that are private, that are nonprofit distributing, that are self-governing, voluntary, and of public benefit. Next slide. So here's a rephrasal of that from Solomon. Next slide. Another definition, there's another component. Here's some synonyms that we often use when we talk about nonprofits, such as the third sector, or NGOs, or NPOs. Many of you have heard these, or charities. Read that for a moment. Next slide. So here's the summary of differences between for-profit and nonprofit. Nonprofit organizations are typically philanthropic. There are no owners. We hold their goods for public benefit. They're tax-free. For-profit organizations have owners, and the profits belong to the owners, and they're taxable. So many organizations now are moving from the nonprofit to for-profit status, and there's some consequences. So what I would like you to do is to watch a video, the video below, and list as many positive or negative results from this change as you can. I'm going to put a little space in the under shared files where you can put this up, and the video is called College Inc., and you can get it at PBS. I'm going to write this up in a separate little attachment that I will send out today. That ends Lecture 1, Part 1.